Hi, it's Dwyer. It is July 9th, 2025. Nothing I say in this video should be construed as investment advice. I want everyone watching this video to do their own due diligence. I'm not a CFA. I'm simply a stock market observer who is sharing some investment ideas that interest me or that I may be pursuing. Your operating assumption should be that I may own any of the stocks that I mention in this video, and that the reason I might own them is to make money. Trust no one, including me. Rather, consider this video to be an invitation to do your own due diligence and independent research concerning the subject matter I discuss. I believe it is worthwhile to study markets in our relentless search for passive income. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now let's talk. On this morning where Nvidia actually crossed the $4 trillion market cap threshold. Right, I believe it's dropped a little bit since then, but understand this is new ground, right? $4 trillion. Crude oil is selling at roughly $67 a barrel. You always want to consider energy costs. Bitcoin is around $108,000 a coin. Okay? Now, let's just briefly touch on the elephant in the room. One of my best friends in life is a leftist. He's already sent me an email this morning, and it's 8:14 a.m. Pacific time. You know, he's excited over Mamdani in New York City, right? Folks, let me just pivot right here for a moment. Make no mistake, I'm a free market person, right? I believe young people need to think about what works, right? They need to think about the fact that Eastern Europe, these countries, East Germany, Yugoslavia, they're no longer with us, right? Because they didn't work, right? The USSR is no longer with us. It didn't work. I encourage people to read The White Pill by Michael Malice. He's an anarchist. Look, get great information wherever you can find it. He's talking in that book about actual life in the Soviet Union after the Bolshevik Revolution, right? Figure out what that actually meant. I can tell you, I used to date a Russian woman, and she would tell me horror stories. Well, let's just talk about a few things. Let's talk about New York City. Folks, and understand, I'm the son of a social worker, right? My parents never talked about owning stocks. Understand, I believe the life I lived, I was in college before I actually met someone who talked about, stocks and owning stocks. Um, but let me just make a few points here. Any politician, I don't care who they are, but any politician who tells you that the government can get into the grocery store business and actually start competing against Amazon grocery is kidding themselves. They're kidding you. Right? Folks, Amazon, I believe, at last count, has roughly about as many robots as they do warehouse workers. Right? This is a company that is, very cost conscious, is using technology, is more than competitive on price with your local supermarket. Now, let me just say, if I'm in Manhattan and, you know, how do I put this diplomatically? If I'm in Manhattan and I want to get food delivered to my house, I can hop online and I can order that food from Amazon Grocery. Some government-run grocery store is not going to beat Amazon Grocery on price. Let me repeat that. Some government-run grocery store is not going to beat Amazon Grocery on price or convenience. So if that's the vision they're selling you a false vision. Let me say this too. As someone who, as a kid, lived in Manhattan, family moved to Queens, I would travel from Queens as a teenager using mass transit to get to the Bronx High School of Science, the same school that Mamdani graduated from. Right? I'm a science alum. I spent my teenage years on mass transit. The trip from Queens, where I lived in Queens, to Bronx High School of Science took 2 hours each way. Right? A lot of experience on New York buses. Folks, anyone who tells you that they're going to make the buses free in a city with the level of homelessness that New York City has is in essence telling you that there are going to be homeless people living on the bus. Right? Let me just say, when I used to take the train from Queens, into Manhattan, then up to the Bronx, that's the way the lines work, the transit lines. Just understand, I would show up in the morning. It would be like 6:30 in the morning or 7 o'clock in the morning at some train station in Queens, and there would already be homeless people on the train. They were living in the subway. They're homeless people living in subways out here in the Bay Area. Right? Talk to your friends who live in cities with mass transit setups. Now, the cost that people pay to get on a bus keeps a lot of people off the bus. Folks, you get rid of the bus fare, and homeless people are going to start taking a taxpayer subsidized trip all around the city. Right? Let's just say, if you're an investor, you need to think about the fact that Uber is really going to take off once the bus system, in essence, gets shut down or diminished by political plans to eliminate the bus fare. Right? So my friend is all excited. I think the people who actually benefit from Mamdani taking over in New York, that's if he gets by the general, are going to be Democrats, because I believe this gives the next group who plan to run for president in 2028, this gives Mark Kelly, this gives Wes Moore, right? This gives Whitmer the opportunity to run against the far left, right? To point out that, the idea of competing with Amazon Grocery, which already has, razor thin profit margins, is a misuse of public funds. Right, folks? It doesn't work. Let me go further. In history, it hasn't worked. Right? Finally, let me say this too. Let's stop losing credibility with this word game. If you know that your Democratic nominee for the mayor's position in New York City has in the past talked of seizing the means of production, don't insult us by telling us that he's anything other than a communist. Right? Don't blur the terms. Don't say, oh, I'm a democratic socialist. when you're talking about seizing the means of production. Folks, that's straight out of Karl Marx. Right? Also, let me close by saying this on this particular point. I don't know about you, but during my life, I haven't been dying to live in North Korea. Right? I just haven't been. I don't understand why people think these centralized economies work. Where's the proof? Somebody tell me where the proof is. I also have my doubts when, I see some young guy, what is he, 33 years old? I see some young guy who wasn't even alive when the Berlin Wall fell. Right? And of course, he's going to talk about the greatness of seizing the means of production. Folks, they had a Berlin Wall for a reason. Right? That wasn't West Germany's idea. That's the other side's idea. You need to keep people in. When you start this whole centralized power, you're going to read government-run newspapers and stuff like that. Let me also mention the obvious here. If you want to own the means of production, understand what it takes in today's America. Right? This morning, I'll even talk about it in this video. This morning, I've been tracking Broadcom. AVGO is the stock symbol. I thought, wow, they're doing a lot of great things. The PE is a little high for my taste, 37. But that's, in a forward-looking, not trailing. Trailing at something like 90. But just understand, in today's United States, if I want a piece of the action in a private stock like Broadcom, I can actually buy it. I can go out and buy some dollar amount of that stock. I don't even need to buy a share. On outfits like Cash App or Robinhood, I can say, you know what, I want to watch this stock. Let me throw $50 at it. Right? If this stock actually continues to do well, if there's upside appreciation, if the $6 billion in free cash flow increases, right? Buying stocks actually a daily thing. I'm not saying you buy stocks every day, but you watch the stock market every day. Right? What that means is you're doing a lot of reading. Right? But just understand, there's no barrier to buying publicly traded stocks. Right? I would argue it's easier to get a piece of the action. It's easier to own a part of the means of production in a capitalist society than it is some closed, centrally planned communist setup. At least that's how it's been historically. Right? Now let's talk about a few things here. Understand there is some bad news in the land of the free. Folks, stocks are overbought. The current stock prices aren't justified by the revenue streams. Right? Just understand, on July 3rd, the Buffett indicator hit 209.53. Folks, the long-term average of the Buffett indicator is 75 to 100. What the Buffett indicator is telling you, and please Google this term, right? View the videos I make as entry points, right? You can then go online and just say Buffett indicator. What is it? What has it been historically? What is it now? Right? Well, now it's bloated. Now it's twice what it should be. You start leaving a healthy range on the Buffett indicator the minute you get north of 125. Folks, we're north of 200. So what that means is that the stock market is going to be a bit of a musical chair situation. Most stocks will drop. Let me repeat that. Most stocks will drop. For the speculators out there, the risk takers who want to short the market, you now have inverse ETFs. If you believe some stock's going to go down, you even have single stock inverse ETFs. Right? So if I believe some stock's bloated, if I were to believe that Broadcom is bloated, and I don't, I just bought Broadcom, but the future is uncertain. Right? If you believe some of these stocks are bloated, you can buy ETFs that thrive as the stock goes down. I don't have to know what I'm doing in terms of shorting stocks. Right? I don't have to qualify to trade put options. I can actually buy inverse ETFs. Right? You can control your own destiny. So let me just talk about the big catch for me this morning. In fact, before I go there, let me point out too, and this is very important, right? I've talked here online about Google in the past. Google, as I make this video, still has a PE below 20. You need to realize that they're now rolling out Waymo service. When I say Google, I meant Alphabet, the parent company. Alphabet's now rolling out Waymo, their autonomous vehicle service in Philly. Right? It's already in Austin. It's already in Phoenix. So you're in the very early innings of autonomous vehicles, right? Robotaxi services being rolled out all over the United States. Right? Now, folks, just understand, Google already is on the cutting edge of AI. You may have used Gemini AI. Right? Just understand, Google, of course, is on the cutting edge of cloud computing. Many people are figuring out that the range of offerings on YouTube exceed legacy TV. Right? And of course, YouTube TV is doing well. Just understand, the real price of these stocks are the PE ratios or the PEG ratio if you want to add in growth. Right? While Google is below 20, Amazon, which is doing well, is up in the 30s. Right? For a Mag 7 stock, Google is underpriced. Right? Pay close attention to how Waymo's entry into Philly goes. Right? As I said, if you're following stocks, that's a daily journey. So let's talk about Broadcom. Let's talk about AI. Folks, AI has huge energy requirements. Right? It takes a lot of electricity to fuel these data centers. Let me just point out that unfortunately, because of politics, we don't have enough nuclear reactors here in the United States. We pale in comparison to countries like China. Right? So we're playing catch up in the space. Well, Broadcom has come up with some chip innovations where they can reduce the need for power consumption by 10x. So in this environment, Broadcom, which is extremely well positioned for AI, is able to provide performance that's less energy intensive. Let me also point out, too, that I like situations like this where in the first quarter their profit margin was something like 40%. As I mentioned earlier, they have $6 billion in free cash flow, money that they can use for things like research and development. Right? I'm not a big stock buyback guy, but I am a big free cash flow guy. So Broadcom has Zach's highest rating, a 1 rating, indicating a strong buy. Right? I picked up a little Broadcom this morning. Again, the symbol is AVGO. I'll make these videos from time to time just talking about stock ideas, other stocks I'm into. I like Uber in part because Uber is actually working with autonomous vehicle companies, right? So now if I want an AV, I can, in certain areas, get one using the Uber app. That's big, right? Uber understands that Uber drivers are being disintermediated, but Uber has figured out a way to continue to have a role in a space that I think is going to be massive. Let me also make another point too. I'll close with this on tariffs. You know I don't like tariffs. You know I just view them as an import tax. Right? I need for people to understand that while China's having economic problems, while some developer bigger than Evergrande has recently had to go bankrupt, right? China is ahead of us in things like rare earth, minerals that we need, right? So I just need for folks to understand that whatever's being said in the press, we don't have the leverage to muscle countries like China because China has some things that we need. Right? Let me also point out that Tesla, I used to own Tesla in the past, right? Tesla's facing fierce competition from overseas, right? You need to keep an eye on these Chinese electric vehicle EV manufacturers, right? They're beating Tesla on price, right? Understand too, robo-taxis, which are new here in the United States, are all over China. There's a deeper penetration of robo-taxis in China than there is here, right? So consider all of that as you're hearing the fantasy we have going on here in the States that other countries are gonna want to pay us a premium to have access to the U.S. market, right? Finally, let me close with this. Japan. Folks, Japan has a debt that dwarfs ours relative to their GDP, right? Japan, to me, is not going to make it long term. Now, I'm astonished that we have an ally who we're, gouging with elevated tariffs. I don't understand it, right? We need to start thinking about our geopolitical interests as we push some tariff story so that the current administration can, feel good about themselves and convince their voters that they're being tough in protecting American interests, right? Let me just say, too, I'm an immigrant to the United States. I was born in Kingston, Jamaica. I don't buy this ridiculous move against immigrants, right? I was raised in New York City when it was a sanctuary city, and I was grateful for that. You don't need a situation where immigrants are maligned and marginalized. Understand you always pick on the powerless people in the room, right? Well, let me just say, Notice how the Trump administration has had to backtrack a little bit because there's a group out there, employers, who are saying, hey, 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 slow the roll. You're depleting our work group, right? And the American teenager doesn't want to join up with our business that requires workers to do things like pick lettuce, clean toilets, know how to farm, right? And so sooner or later, markets take over. Sooner or later, the real economy takes over. This pipe dream of eliminating every illegal immigrant ignores the fact that many of these cities, New York City, are you listening? LA, are you listening? Would be economically diminished if you deport every illegal. Those are my thoughts this July 9th, 2025. Let's make this interactive. I hope you leave yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. If you're a Mamdani supporter, right? If you're one of these people who, was part of this groundswell, and I understand, the dollar has been debased, middle class life is tough, middle class people are relying on wage income. Many people are like my family where, again, my dad and I, he never told me he owned a stock. I left home before I met someone who owned stocks, right? I understand that there are groups that feel marginalized and that are blaming the idea of capitalism for the fact that people in their neighborhood are struggling, right, folks? Capitalism can actually exist on a gold standard, right? Maybe what should be blamed is Nixon's decision to delink the US dollar from gold backing, right? Maybe that's where we went wrong. Maybe the answer isn't having some 33-year-old politician who, might not have led more than 5 people in any group in his life, but who now wants to somehow be mayor of 7 million in a city with a lot of tension, right? I know they always tell you that mobsters, are on the decline in New York City, right? That's what they always claim. And then, of course, there's that occasional arrest of some cop someplace who you find out was on some crime family's payroll, right? Suddenly you are, in a place, let's say Brighton Beach, and you're looking around and, you realize that a lot of the economy is underground, right? Obviously, New York has developers looking for an edge. Everyone wants that, official permission to build in Manhattan, some, new skyscraper and stuff like that. Not everyone's operating above board. You have unions who, if they see any sign of weakness in the public sector, they're going to say, hey, we want more money on that next deal, right? Here you have a 33-year-old who you would not hire to run a Mag 7, right? You would wonder what your company's doing if you own stock in some company and some 33-year-old who is not a founder, who doesn't have an extensive background, right? Either in, being a mayor or in the business world, suddenly is talking about challenging Jeff Bezos and Amazon Grocery, right? On the theory that he can slash the prices of food, right? Let me just tell you, too, I'm an Amazon Grocery user, right? Go to Amazon Grocery. I can tell you out here in California, high prices all over. Um, Parents can pick up generic frosted flakes on Amazon Grocery right now for under $2. Look it up, right? Under $2 in a cash-strapped city like New York City. That's the part of the private sector that they're going to try to build a city commercial outfit to compete against. Let me hear from you in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.